Shereen, is London ready for Prime Minister Modi?
Well, it's gearing up, Nentara, for Prime Minister Modi's visit on the 12th. Remember, as we reported here on CNBC TV 18 this morning, the Prime Minister comes in on the 12th, and there will be a CEO forum that will take place. In fact, what we understand from sources, people like Cyrus Misty, Aditya Puri, Baba Kalyani, Tulsi Tanti, they will be part of the CEO forum. CEOs will be meeting both Prime Minister David Cameron as well as Prime Minister Modi on the 13th. And of course, defence, skills development, financial services, regulatory reform, these are going to be some of the issues that will be here for discussion. Of course, CNBC TV 18 in full force here, tracking the developments, but we've started off on a rather unfortunate note because it was a coincidence. We were supposed to interview Lord Swaraj Paul, the steel magnate, the man behind Caparo Industries here this morning, and unfortunately his son, Angad Paul, his youngest son, 45-year-old, died on Sunday. That's the 8th of November. The police at this point in time have ruled out any suspicious circumstances, but it is an unfortunate development. Remember, Caparo Industries has been going through some fairly difficult times. In fact, out of the 20 businesses as part of the group, 16 have now been put into administration. PwC has been appointed as the administrator. Let me also bring in my colleague Sanjay Suri. He's here with us in London, also tracking the action. Sanjay, thanks very much for joining us on CNBC TV 18. Let me start by first asking you about the unfortunate incident with Angad Paul, and then we'll talk about Prime Minister Modi's visit. It's been difficult for the Caparo Group over the last several months now.
Well, it's been getting difficult for British steel industry itself in the UK, and Caparo inevitably has been caught up in it.
Yeah.
Particularly Angad Paul. I mean, he was involved with the group earlier. Then he branched out into filmmaking. That was quite successful for a while, then not so successful, then was back in the steel business with the family. But clearly the business has not been going very well, and he's been associated with that difficulties quite inevitably.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is of course going to be something that we are going to have to track as to what happens now with the administrator. PwC has been appointed to look at what happens to these businesses, whether they'll be restructured, divested, and so on and so forth. But let's talk about Prime Minister Modi's visit here. You know, you had Xi Jinping here in London just a couple of weeks ago, and of course the comparisons are being made about the kind of reception that Prime Minister Modi is likely to enjoy. The Wembley occasion is going to be the big one, the Madison Square equivalent here in London. You just returned from Wembley. What's going on there? All set up?
Well, I've seen more empty seats than I've ever seen before. And I see them filling up.
Not on the 13th.
I see them filling up on the 13th, and I'm waiting to see what that will look like.
60,000, you think?
60,000, because they can't take more, you see, because the stage is on one side of the stadium.
Right.
And of course, they're not going to have people on the side and behind. And therefore, 60,000 and not more, and they say they have a waiting list. But this really will be what this visit is about. On the other matters that you mentioned, you know, a lot of very senior executives from India, they will be here, they'll be meeting the prime ministers. But usually the pattern has been that when India and Britain sit down to talk, they agree only to talk some more. So whether this will lead to a lot of rhetoric and statement of intentions or to substantive business, we have to see in days ahead, but it is very likely to be more talk and more around soft skills, because the British want to sell consultancy. They don't want to put pounds on the ground in India. They don't want to come and soil their hands. So it is consultancy that they want to offer from here and through visiting India.
And my final question, Sanjay, and of course we're going to continue this conversation through this week here on CNBC TV 18 with you, but on any controversial issues that are likely to be taken up, tax of course is going to be one of them, but this other business about, you know, the growing perception of intolerance in India and whether that's likely to come up, because I understand that the Foreign Secretary in London did seem to suggest so.
Well, I was at this meeting where Mr. Philip Hammond, the Foreign Secretary, said that the Moody's report, and that of course has some content indicating that there is disquiet over the position of minorities, and that will have a knock-on effect on investment. That this is something that the British will raise, which is to say the Prime Minister Cameron will raise with Mr. Modi. Certainly, if he were to do so, that's going to create a good deal of tension. Mr. Modi is not going to take kindly to this kind of intervention from Britain. He's very likely to tell them that we can look after our own, we don't need advice from you. So if that issue were to come up, there is very likely to be some political tension. And if we take that together with indications that we're not going to have very big ticket business announcements through the visit, we could be running the risk of creating political friction without a very big business fallout.
Absolutely. So we'll have to see whether that indeed is taken up as part of the Prime Minister's visit. But, you know, we've been talking to investors